Hi, welcome back to Random Reading Pathways. My name is Matt. Yes, I do have a name. I don't think I've said it on this channel yet, but I am Matt. And I wanted to check in with just a couple quick updates, a small little book haul from the other day, and a couple books I've read recently. So I posted a quick short the other day from inside the Philly Book Trader. So I live near Philadelphia, and there is the Philly Book Trader used bookstore in Old City. And it's just a wonderful bookstore. It's just crammed with shelves and all kinds of books. It's one of those where you have to basically shuffle your way around the aisles and shelves just because it's so crowded with all kinds of offerings. I've been meaning to go back there for a long time, and especially this year since I've been reading again finally this year, because I did go probably 5 or 6 years ago to the Philly Book Trader, and I picked up a small book haul at that time using randomness, which unfortunately sat since that time until this year without being read. But yeah, just quickly to show you kind of like what randomness brought me there last time at the Philly Book Trader. And again, these sat for probably 5, 6 years until I finally got around to them this year, but they were all great. So I was excited to be able to go back and get a new haul, which I'll show after. But so my first book from a few years back was Just a Couple of Days by Tony Vigorito. I'm just giving a quick little few-second summary here. This is about a kind of secret government agency, military agency of sorts, that creates this infectious sort of disease with apparently good intentions. They're trying to remove the communication capabilities of humans in order to avoid violent conflict. But the main character is a professor who they kind of bribe or co-opt, against his will, to create a cure for it, because they want to have a cure in place before they deploy this weapon. But it gets out, it leaks, and it infects people. And you see what happens when they can't communicate anymore. And what's interesting about it is I think the spin in this book a little bit is, is that the worst thing in the world? Because everybody seems pretty happy. So this was kind of cool. Another book from last time that I finally read this year, A Bend in the River by V.S. Naipaul. This is about Salim, who's an Indian man who buys a general store, like a small shop, in a fictional village in Africa, it's fictional, but it's supposed to be based off a place near the Congo River. And he kind of runs this shop, and he interacts with the different people who are coming into sort of more modernization in the area. A lot of different shops and other things spring up around him, and it kind of shows his place among that, shows how a little bit of industrialization and advancement in the area affects people in different ways. So that was a good read from the Philly Book Trader a while back. And the last one that I finally read this year that I got last time, A.S. Byatt's Possession. I think a lot has been said about this book, obviously. It's a Booker Prize winning novel. And yeah, I really love this. I read it right at the beginning of this year. So it was kind of an extra special read because I had finally gotten back into reading. But yeah, just quickly, it's about two modern scholars who are tracing the history of two, not ancient, but older poets from, 100, 150, 250 years before them, kind of Victorian era a little bit. And the main character, Roland, who's one of the scholars, he stumbles on some letters, or a letter that was unknown previously from the poet he studies to another writer from that time period, a female, and it kind of jumps back and forth in time between that older time and showing those two poets and how they kind of corresponded with each other through poetry and through very just incredible writing, all created by Byatt. So this was a great book. So with those three, having been read this year finally, and just enjoying each one very much, I was excited to go back to the Philly Book Trader. So I went there the other day, And I'll just show you quickly. I got 3 books from there. So as I've said on the channel before, I had a pretty good reading period earlier in life, and then it kind of just fell off the cliff for a bunch of years until this year. But back then, one of the books that I did read when I was a bit younger, through randomness, through just a random selection at my library at the time, was a book, Passage by Connie Willis. It's kind of a science fiction book, a little bit, with some medical spin on it, interestingly. But I've always had been on the lookout for this to see if I could find it at a used bookstore. Every time I go, I scan through Williams, Willig, and I look for Willis to see if it's there. Never found it yet until the Philly Book Trader. So here it is. This is Passage by Connie Willis. So I did read this some years ago, and I just was enthralled by it at the time. I was kind of blown away by it. I actually had to read kind of the Dust Jacket summary here to refamiliarize myself with this one, but I was so happy to just see this sitting on the shelf when I'd been looking for it with just about every bookstore visit that I've made. So, you know, quickly, it's basically about there's a doctor who creates a way to bring about near-death experiences for people because he's studying them. And the main character here is a psychologist who works in a hospital or with hospital patients and is kind of working with him to study these near-death experiences. And the author gives you some riveting, incredible imagery and descriptions of what these look like to these patients. But then the main character ultimately submits herself to experiencing one and gets way too wrapped up deeply in it to the point where it's difficult for her to get out. So, and it's called Passage in a sense because of the idea of passage between life and death, but also the Titanic, the ship, it plays a large role in this because from what I recall, the main character's near-death experience is, I think it's experienced on the Titanic, or at least some of it is experienced on the Titanic. It's just a incredible book. I've always carried it with me ever since I read it years ago. And like I said, I've been going to used bookstores quite a bit lately, and I always look for Passage by Connie Willis, and I found a nice hardcover copy of it sitting there. So I picked that one up to add to the collection of one that I've read. And then 2 more books from there, really, sitting on the shelf below it. So this was actually, the way I came to this book was I was scanning for Connie Willis, and my eyes first hit this one. And I thought it was the only Connie Willis book that was in stock, but then on the row, on the shelf below this one actually was Passage. So I grabbed Passage, then my eyes went back up to the other one, and there was only one other Connie Willis book that was in stock at the Book Trader. And I was on the fence. It didn't come about randomly with my exact methodology of picking books, but it did come about with sort of a type 2 randomness where there's a connection to something else, and I seize upon that. So this is Lincoln's Dreams by Connie Willis. So I picked this one up, given how much I enjoyed Passage, which I just showed. And yeah, this was another one that was there. So it was in pretty good shape. And that's what I'll do basically is, if randomness leads me to an author or a book that I really love and resonates with me, at that point going forward, I'm going to deviate a little from the initial randomness and not just ignore that author sitting there with another book that I haven't read. I'm gonna get it. So Lincoln's Dreams, it goes into the strange prophetic dreams of Abraham Lincoln. I mean, that's just a quick little end of the Dust Jacket here. I won't, go into the whole thing, but it's kind of got a similar vibe, it looks like, where they're analyzing internal workings of someone's mind. One was a near-death experience. This one is dreams, but it has to do with Lincoln. So they're probably a good historical spin on this. But yeah, Connie Willis, the one book I've read, I've loved, so I was looking forward to another one. Just to show you another quick little example of like how my crazy mind works here. if I'm on the fence with something like this and I don't know if it really qualifies on my random pathway as, should I get it, should I not, should I look for something else? What happened with this, Lincoln's Dreams, the gears started spinning of, well, I think there's a few connections here. So um, I haven't read a lot of modern, heavy hitter, best of year lists, critics' favorite lists, all that kind of thing. The New York Times 100 best novels list, I looked through it. I don't know if I've read any of it. But in kind of recently learning about some of what's been on some of those lists the last couple of years, there's a book that has stuck out in my mind, both because of the title being so interesting and intriguing, and also what I understand to be the subject matter, which is Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders. So I haven't read it, I haven't picked up a copy of it or anything like that, but I've had Lincoln in the Bardo in my head, kind of going around a little bit lately because I've seen a lot about it. And apparently I think it's about Lincoln, his grief over his son's death, and kind of a fictional, obviously, account of him being in this kind of like transitional space between life and death, or like a purgatory type thing, which again, kind of, now that I say it, kind of mirrors Passage a little, which is a near-death experience type setting and goes into somebody's passageway between that. So those things were firing up here, like some of those weird little similarities, and that's kind of what I talk about with random reading pathways. If some of that clicks up here, I'm like, oh, I'm thinking about Lincoln in the Bardo lately, trapped in between a purgatory state, and then you got Lincoln's Dreams from the same author of Passage, which was a near-death experience. So yeah, all that came together, and I went, I think that's enough, to push me toward certainly picking up Lincoln's Dreams. So I'm going to check that one out. And then the last one was Random Number Generator. I hadn't done it to that point yet in the Book Trader, and when I go to a cheap used bookstore, as the title of my channel and everything I've said so far here implies, I'm not going to leave without just running one little roll of the dice. So I did that, and what I did for this one, it's such a big fiction section, I just went by author's last name. So basically I did 1 through 26 for the letters of the alphabet. It gave me B. There were 26 full shelves of B authors, which was just great. That's like the most fun part of doing the random selection, is when you have that many shelves to narrow down. Eventually punched in a few more numbers, and it led me to this book. So this is Maeve Binchy, Heart and Soul. Nice hardcover copy with some really pretty artwork on the cover and also on the inside here. I don't know anything about this, as is usually the case when I do a purely random selection. But yes, there was actually 2 copies of this sitting next to each other. This one happened to be a little more sun-worn, it looked like. The color was vastly different on the copy next to it. This one was a little more worn out and faded. And the pages of this one were more worn and yellow. But I took both down off the shelf, kind of played around with them a little, compared them, and this one held together much better. Everything is very solid. I'm not feeling any spine breaking or anything. So it's about staff of a heart clinic in a community caught between the old and the new Ireland. And Dr. Clara Casey has been offered the thankless job of establishing the clinic. So that's the gist of it. And yeah, interested to see what Heart and Soul is about. So that's my Philly Book Trader haul from, we'll call it yesterday and today. An old haul, which I finally read, and a new haul, which I hope to read soon. Moving on from that quickly, just 2 recent reads that I finished. So this was, when I get to a book and talk about, finishing it, I like to, kind of give it its due and give it its place on the pathway. So I just want to mention my pathway to the book before I get to it. So my pathway to this book, another used bookstore somewhat near me, not as big of a selection as like something like the Philly Book Trader, and I tend to look at the fiction section there. They do have a big sci-fi area as well, which I'll probably get into at some point, but their fiction is geared a little bit more to, they have a contemporary literary fiction shelf, but it's pretty small. The bulk of their fiction is classics and, modern classics and older classics, kind of. So I punched the randomness in there. And this was a little while ago I got this, and I just finished it a week or two ago. Chinua Achebe, Things Fall Apart. I got a nice Everyman's Library copy of this. I have a couple Everyman's Library copies of books now. I like these a lot. So when I see them, sometimes, I'll grab one just for that alone. But yeah, so this, I didn't know about it going in, but it's basically about a character, Okonkwo, who is kind of this revered figure in this fictional African village, which is supposed to be in Nigeria, but all the places described are fictional, and the tribes that are described are fictional. But yeah, I enjoyed it. It was it's kind of broken into 3 parts. So the first part kind of shows Okonkwo and his family, his wives, because the custom in this village is, the men have multiple wives, and it's sort of that type of familial setup. But it's an interesting book because it veers very quickly back and forth between sort of nice descriptions of kind of how everyone makes their living, and farming of yams, and sort of traditional village gatherings that take place, and customs. There's great dialogue between the characters. I know that's one of the things that's celebrated about this book, is how the characters speak to each other, and how some of the elders in the village interact and will have a bit of a storytelling streak going through their dialogue. So they'll be talking to a younger person in the story, and they'll interject, normal dialogue with, and that reminds me of the tale of this. And, they'll put a little kind of parable in there, or a story, to make their point. And it's done so well, so it keeps the dialogue really interesting to read. But what I was saying was, it veers between sort of those little slice of life depictions to some very much darker things that take place. I won't give it away really what goes on, but there's a lot of suffering that goes on, and some of the customs that the village people engage in. I think part of what goes on with this book, and what commentary since its publication has really focused on, is some of the practices, and some of them can seem horrific and barbaric. And I don't ever make it a point to say, well, I think it's a bad book because terrible things happen in it. I don't think the author, I don't know, but it didn't seem to me that the author is trying to highlight some of the barbaric type practices that some of the characters engage in this book as a good thing. But there are certain superstitions that people have in these villages, where if twins are born, they are not allowed to exist. And the treatment of the wives of these men in the villages is certainly not an objectively worthwhile or good thing. But again, I don't think that the book is trying to say it is or not. I think it's just describing a fictional village in Africa at the time. And so it's broken into, there's some slice of life of what goes on in the villages, and then there's some really dark things that happen, and they have consequences. Okonkwo, who's the main character, he's very revered, and he's a very powerful figure in his village, but he has an unfortunate accident that happens to him. Well, not to him, but something happens that kills somebody else, and it causes him to be exiled. But then eventually he finds his way back, and at the time he comes back, a lot has changed in the village. So yeah, again, I'm not trying to weigh in morally on anything in this story. I know that there's been a lot written about this and spoken about this book as far as its moral standing, but just for me, it was interesting just to read it and get a sense of African literature, which I know is well studied and well taught. So yeah, this was an interesting one to read. I enjoyed it. And then jumping very far differently from that, so I typically right now what I'm doing is I'm reading sort of one book simultaneously with reading one series in the nature of usually fantasy or science fiction. So I try to have one book in a fantasy or sci-fi series going alongside one just fiction book or nonfiction book at the same time. So earlier this year, when I decided to get back on doing that, I went to my library and I ran the random number generator, and it landed on the Lacanius trilogy by James Islington, which I didn't know anything about at the time, but I took out book one, which is an echo of things. No, I'm sorry. Book one is A Shadow of What Was Lost. So I read that earlier this year, and then I just finished reading book two, which is an echo of things to come. So I have book three still to go in the Lacanius trilogy. Turns out, after I got it and looked up some information on it, looked up some booktube videos on it, it is heavily discussed in the fantasy booktube space and just the fantasy reader community in general. Just a really quick little summary on it. I mean, there's a lot going on in these books. They're like 700, 800 pages each so far. But in general, it's a world where there's different classes of people that have different abilities. There's augurs who have these supernatural, incredibly powerful abilities to control people, to control time, to inflict incredible amount of damage on things due to strengthening themselves through essence and other elements that they can draw upon. And then there's other class of people, gifted, who have certain small abilities, but not quite to the extent augurs do. And then there's just common everyday people. And in years past, I think 20 or 30 years before the series is set, there was a kind of a rebellion against these augurs as they became too powerful. And so the story up to this point has been very interesting. It does feature viewpoints from different levels in this hierarchy. So there's kind of an augur, there's a gifted, there's a royalty character who's a politician / royal figure, but they're all younger. I think they're supposed to be like, young men and women, they say. So they're maybe in their early 20s in common, speaking about it. But I've enjoyed the series so far, and I do plan on finishing with the third book, which is called, what is the third one? The Light of All That Falls, I believe. But yeah, so I did just finish An Echo of Things to Come. And it was, by comparison, I think I'm enjoying the books more as they go, which I have heard about this series. Just as an example, as I said, I took both of these Lacanius books from my library. And the first book, The Shadow of What Was Lost, took me two renewal periods to finish it. So the standard loan period and then 2 renewals. An Echo of Things to Come, which I just finished, I only needed to renew once. So I got through it a little quicker, and it was moving along better than the first book. So yeah, anyone who's in the fantasy booktube space or anything like that, I'm sure has come across this title. I'm glad that randomness led me to it. Interestingly, a big central tenet of this book is actually fate, and the battle against fate, and whether fate can be, kind of dabbled with, or whether it's just there and you're powerless against it, which again reminds me a little bit of Random Reading Pathways. So just so happens my randomness took me to that series. But that's it. I'm reading a couple books at the moment, and hopefully I'll finish up some stuff soon that I can talk about. I've done a good amount of book hauls lately, certainly more so than I've done in recent years. So, I'm not looking to do too much more in that way. The TBR pile is starting to get pretty big, which is a good thing though. So hopefully I'll get through some more of those and check in about those soon. But for now, that's it. Thanks to anybody who comes across this, and hope to be back with some more updates shortly. Thanks.